Hey, fourth grade. We are going to review comparing decimals from that you did last week. Your goal for this week is to be super comfortable with switching from a fraction in tenths and hundredths to a decimal to tenths and hundredths, along with being able to compare those and understand the difference in the values. So this is what you see on my screen right now is what you did in your practice last Thursday or Wednesday, whatever day you completed it. So I just want us to go over that together, and we're going to do a few more practice and talk through some of them. But you have an assessment coming up on Thursday, and if you are not comfortable with comparing decimals, please let us know, and we will be happy to help you. I know I have already helped a couple kiddos this week, video chatting with them on Google Hangouts, so that way they are feeling a little bit more comfortable with this task. So if you are not understanding it or you are confused, please reach out to one of your teachers. So you'll see on my screen what you did last week, and you can see where this is the biggest one that most of you had a lot of questions about, because it says 6 3/10 versus 6 3/100. So I'm going to get my iPad. When I see 6 3/100, what does that look like on a fraction? So this is what we're looking at, 6 3/100. But what does that look like as a fraction? Well, if I have 3/100, isn't this what I would see as a fraction? Now the next one says 6 3/10. So if I have 6 3/10, 6 3/10, what would that look like as a fraction? Well, it would be 3/10. Well, and I don't want to forget our whole numbers, so it would be 6 3/10 and 6 3/100. So this is what our fractions would look like. Now, if I did this, which one would you say is larger? Probably the 6 3/10. But even still, I could go down here and say, well, I know that 3/10 is equivalent to what hundredths? So if I said I had 3/10 and I wanted to make that an equivalent fraction with hundredths as my denominator, what would that 3 become? A 30. Because like we learned in third quarter, whatever you do to the bottom of a fraction, you must do to the top. So if I want that 10 to be 100, I would have to multiply the bottom by 10. Then if I multiply the bottom by 10, I must also multiply the top by 10. So that means 3/10 is equivalent to 30/100. So if I have 6 30/100 versus 6 3/100, which is larger? The 6 30/100. So even though those decimals look very similar, they're very, very different. So you have 3/100 or 3/10, and those 3/10 are much bigger pieces than those 3/100. So be careful of that. Okay, we're going to go through this pretty fast. In this one, you have 4 and 93/100 or 5 and 93/100. So these you didn't even have to look very far because you had 4 in the ones place and 5 in the ones place. So that 5 in the ones place is going to be much larger than the 4. So that's going to be larger. Same thing with this one over here. You have the 6 in the ones place and the 8. So when you have that whole number of a 6 and an 8, we can all compare whole numbers in our sleep, most of us. So you have a 6 and an 8, which is bigger. Well, the 8. So we didn't even have to look at the decimals on that. Now, when we move down here to 11 2/10 and 11 17/100, that becomes a little bit more tricky because we have the same whole number of 11, but now we have 2/10 versus 17/100. But something I want you to think about is, what is that 2/10 equivalent to? So if I were to write 11 2/10 as a decimal, of course, this is what it looks like. If I were to write it as a fraction, this is what it would look like. But now if I wanted to change that 2/10 to make it equivalent to 100, what would my new numerator be? 20. So that means 11 20/100 is equivalent to 11 2/10. So is really 11 20/100 or 11 17/100 larger? Well, this one's larger. So even though that 11.2, that 11 2/10 It looks like it's a smaller number because it has less place values, but really that's a bigger place value than that hundredth place. So be very careful of that. So I'm sure you've already looked ahead at these others. And if you have any questions, let me know about the rest of them. You just have to remember your place value order, and you have to remember that tenths are larger than hundredths. So if I have 3 tenths and 15 hundredths, well, which has the most tenths? Because those are going to be a bigger fraction than the hundredths will be. So let's look down here. This is the next one. So you've got 5 tenths and 49 hundredths. Well, 5 tenths is equivalent to how many hundredths? 50. So I have 50 hundredths or 49 hundredths. Which is larger? The 5 tenths. So I'm going to take my inequality sign, or my greater than, less than, or equal to sign, and I'm going to put it up there. Now let's move on. So in this next box, I have 27 and 8 tenths, or 72 and 68 hundredths. But look at those whole numbers. Do we really have to look at the decimals on this one? We don't, because those whole numbers are very different. And which one has the bigger whole number? 72. So I'm going to take my inequality sign, or my greater than, less than, or equal to sign, and I'm going to put it up there. So you're going to do that for the rest of this slide and comparing them. And if you get stuck or you want a teacher to check your answers, just let us know. These next 2 slides, you are going to say, well, I have 20 hundredths. So you could either write it like this, or you can write it like this. You could do either. So you could do both the decimal and the fraction, or you could just do the decimal. Whichever way, at this point, it's easier for you to see. You will have to be able to determine the decimal, though. And then you've got 2 tenths. So here's the decimal for 2 tenths and the fraction for 2 tenths. But which is larger? Or do we know? Well, if we were looking at the slides before, we know that 2 tenths is also equivalent to 20 hundredths. So aren't they equal? So then I'm going to pull this up here into the box. So there's a lot of steps in this one. You either have to, you either have to do the decimal and the fraction, and then you have to do the inequality sign. And you're going to do that for the rest of slide 4 and slide 5. And this one already has the fraction for you, so then you're going to put this one in decimal form. So if I have 8 and 2 tenths, I know that 8 is my whole number, then I have my decimal and then I know the tenths place is the first place value after the decimal, so I'm going to have 8 and 2 tenths. And then this one says 8 ones and 2 hundredths. Sorry, my eyes are itchy. So I have 8 ones, so that's a whole number. Ones are a whole number, and we all know that, so I'm going to do 8 whole numbers. But that says 2 hundredths. So what place value would that be in? Would it be in the first place value after the decimal, or the second? It would be in the second. So then it would look like this. Well, you wouldn't put 2 decimals. I just accidentally did that. And now which one's larger? The 2 tenths, because it would be equivalent to 20 hundredths versus the 2 hundredths on the left side. So you're going to finish slide 4 and slide 5, well, slide 3, 4, and 5 for practice as you need. Then this slide is really important because it gives you those word problems. So we're going to do the first one together, and then I'm going to let you work on the rest by yourself. So it says the length of Riley's string is 2 and 6 tenths meters. If Harold's string is longer than Riley's string, which one could be the length of Harold's string? So to me, that tells me Riley's is 2 and 6 meters, and I need to look for one that is longer than that. And if it's not longer than that, then it can't be the length of Harold's string. So is 3 and 2 meters longer? Well, if we look at our whole numbers, we know that 2 is smaller than 3. So as of right now, we know that A is larger. Now, what about B? It says 1 and 7 meters. What about, let's start with the whole numbers, is 1 a larger number? It's not. So then we need to look at our decimal if it's not. And is 7 tenths larger than 6 tenths? It is, but since our whole number is smaller, then it's not going to be bigger. And then C comes a little bit closer where you have 58 hundredths, but it's still 2 hundredths away from 2 and 6 tenths. So your answer for this one would be A. So you want to make sure that you read all of those and then you make sure that you answer the correct question. So you'll finish these next 3 problems on here. If you have any questions, let a teacher know. We are happy to help you understand this. Have a great Tuesday, guys.